The clock on the wall ticked away relentlessly as Jamal Carter sat at his desk in the back of Mrs. Dawson's AP Calculus classroom. His pencil hovered above the test paper, the faint scratch of lead on paper echoing in the otherwise silent room. It had been exactly 20 minutes since the test had begun. His classmates were still scribbling away, their faces twisted in concentration. But Jamal had already finished. He lowered his pencil, leaned back in his chair, and took a deep breath. The room seemed to get even quieter, if that was possible. Mrs. Dawson was walking slowly up and down the aisles, eyes scanning the room, making sure no one was looking at anyone else's paper. The fluorescent lights above hummed quietly, almost as if they were aware of the tension in the room. Jamal looked out the window at the sprawling view of the school courtyard. His mind, however, was far from the grass and trees. He thought about the years he'd spent working harder than anyone else in this school. He thought about the nights he stayed up late, watching math tutorials on YouTube, working through problems his classmates barely understood. And now, here he was, done with the test before anyone else, knowing that his score would likely be the best in the class. Not because he was lucky, but because he was good. Really good. But there was a problem. Jamal wasn't supposed to be good at this. At least not according to the way things were supposed to work in this world. He was a black boy, one of the very few students of color in this predominantly white, prestigious school. He wasn't supposed to stand out in AP Calculus. He wasn't supposed to ace a test like this. People didn't expect someone like him to be a genius. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Dawson's voice broke through his thoughts. "You have 20 minutes left." Jamal nodded, but he wasn't looking at her. He was still staring out the window, mind racing. He had finished the test early, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something in the air, the way Mrs. Dawson was eyeing him, was there suspicion in her gaze? Maybe he was just imagining it, but he couldn't help feeling like the others were watching him too. He wasn't just another student. He was different. And that difference made people uncomfortable. "Time's up." Mrs. Dawson called out, snapping him back to reality. Jamal gathered his things slowly, pretending not to notice the way his classmates were eyeing him as he made his way to the front of the room. He handed in his test, the weight of the paper feeling heavier than usual. As he walked back to his seat, he could almost feel the judgment in the air. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, and students began filing out of the classroom. Jamal hung back for a moment, watching them go. He stood there for a beat longer than necessary, lost in his thoughts. "Jamal," Mrs. Dawson's voice came from behind him. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" He turned around. "Sure, Mrs. Dawson." She was standing by the door, her arms folded across her chest. Her expression was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line. She motioned for him to come over. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Dawson?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though a sense of unease was settling in his stomach. She nodded slowly. "I just need to ask you a question, Jamal." She looked around the classroom, making sure it was empty before she continued. "I noticed that you finished the test quite quickly. A little too quickly. Are you sure you didn't?" "Mrs. Dawson, I didn't cheat," Jamal interrupted, his voice sharp. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to defend himself so quickly, but the accusation hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken tension. She held up her hand, a gesture that was meant to calm him down. "I'm not accusing you, Jamal. She hesitated, glancing at the test papers piled on her desk. "You're just, so fast. It's unusual." "I studied," Jamal said, his voice quieter now. "I've been studying for this test for weeks. I'm just good at this stuff." Mrs. Dawson's gaze softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "Well, we'll see when the scores come back. I'll review your answers carefully. You may have just had a lucky streak today." Jamal nodded, trying to keep the frustration from showing on his face. He didn't want to argue. He knew what she was implying, even if she hadn't said it outright. A black student acing an AP calculus test wasn't a fluke. It wasn't lucky. It was just the result of hard work and determination. But for some reason, Mrs. Dawson, and everyone else in this school, didn't seem to understand that. They didn't see him the way they saw the other students. They saw him as something less. As he walked out of the classroom, his mind was racing. He could already hear the whispers. They would spread quickly. Rumors would start. People would question how a kid like him could possibly get a perfect score. They wouldn't believe it. Not unless they saw it with their own eyes. But Jamal had already made peace with that. He had spent his whole life dealing with doubt. His mother had always told him that people would try to make him feel small, to tell him he didn't belong. But she also told him that he was special. That he had a gift that no one could take away. Don't let them dim your light, she'd always say. Jamal walked through the crowded hallways, head held high, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had a feeling that this test, this moment, was the beginning of something bigger. He didn't know what yet. But he could sense it. And as he left the school building that day, something in his gut told him that the whispers were just the start. Soon, there would be more. Soon, everyone would know what he was capable of. What they didn't know, though, was that Jamal's genius wasn't something that could be hidden for long. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal Carter wasn't supposed to be here. He had told himself that 1,000 times before, usually during the long bus rides to school, or late at night when he was studying while everyone else was asleep. A kid like him, a black boy from the south side of Atlanta, didn't belong in a school like St. Augustine Prep. He wasn't supposed to be sitting in AP Calculus, acing tests that some of his classmates couldn't even finish. But here he was. Jamal sat on the worn-out sofa in his small apartment, looking around at the familiar surroundings. The walls were lined with mismatched pictures, some of them fading with age, others newly hung. There were no family portraits, no polished frames. Just the pieces of life that had been cobbled together over the years. His mother, Rhonda Carter, had made this place feel like home, even though the apartment itself was a constant reminder of their struggles. The air was thick with the scent of garlic and onions, a meal simmering on the stove as Jamal's mother worked late into the night, preparing dinner. It was a routine that had played out for as long as Jamal could remember. Rhonda worked as a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital, pulling double shifts when she could. She always made sure Jamal had everything he needed, even if it meant sacrificing sleep or time with him. "Jamal, did you finish your homework?" Rhonda's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Almost done, Mom," Jamal replied, glancing up from the notebook he had spread out on the coffee table. He scribbled a few more equations, his pen moving fast, almost as if he were racing against the clock. His mind was always in motion, thinking 2 steps ahead, working through problems even before they appeared. Rhonda entered the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a tall woman, with an easy smile and a no-nonsense attitude. Her hair was pulled back into a practical bun, a look that Jamal had come to associate with the late hours she spent caring for patients at the hospital. She leaned over his shoulder, peering at the page in front of him. "You're working hard, huh?" she asked, her voice softening with pride. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be doing all this advanced math. You used to hate math when you were younger." Jamal smiled faintly, remembering the days when he tried to avoid math homework at all costs. He never had the passion for numbers back then, at least not until he realized that math was more than just numbers. It was a language. It was a way to see the world differently. And once he figured that out, he couldn't stop. Every new formula, every equation was a puzzle to be solved. And Jamal was good at puzzles. "I like it now," he said simply. "It makes sense to me." Rhonda laughed, a deep, throaty sound that seemed to fill the room. "I'm proud of you, baby." Just make sure you don't forget about your roots. You're not just a math genius, you're a Carter. And that means something. Jamal looked at her, unsure how to respond. He didn't really understand what his mother meant by that. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. She had raised him alone, always working to make sure he had the things he needed, but there was always an undercurrent of struggle in everything she did. The life they lived wasn't easy, but Jamal had learned early on that the only way to survive was to be strong. To be better than everyone else. To prove that he deserved more. And yet, despite all of this, he never felt like he quite belonged. At school, he was always an outsider. He had been one of the few black students in his class, and while his classmates were kind enough, they didn't really get him. They didn't understand the hunger in his eyes, the drive to succeed that came from a place far deeper than ambition. At St. Augustine Prep, Jamal stood out in more ways than one. The school was a prestigious institution, one of the best in the state. But its student body was overwhelmingly white, and there were very few students who looked like him. Most of the teachers treated him with the kind of caution reserved for a rare specimen, unsure of how to engage with him, yet fascinated by his intelligence. They were all quick to acknowledge that Jamal was gifted, but they were just as quick to dismiss his achievements as anomalies. His success was always met with questions. Still, Jamal kept pushing. For every awkward glance, every whisper behind his back, he worked harder. He was determined to prove that his intelligence wasn't a fluke, that he wasn't some stereotype. He was Jamal Carter, and he was going to make sure the world knew his name. Jamal, do you ever think about what you're going to do after high school? Rhonda's voice broke through his thoughts again, her question lingering in the air. Jamal paused, considering the question. I want to go to college. Somewhere good, like Princeton or MIT. I've been looking at their math programs. I think I can get in. Rhonda raised an eyebrow. You think? Jamal, I know you can get in. You've got the brains for it. But it's not just about that. It's about how you carry yourself. People will try to knock you down. But you've got to remember who you are. Remember where you come from. You're not just representing yourself. You're representing this family. You're representing the South Side. Jamal looked up at her, nodding slowly. He had heard her say this before, but today it felt different. Maybe it was because of what had happened in class that morning. He wasn't just an average student in an elite school. He was different. And that difference made him a target. You know I've got you, right? Rhonda added, sitting beside him on the couch. She put her arm around his shoulder, pulling him close. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Don't ever forget that. Jamal leaned into her hug, feeling a sense of warmth and reassurance that only his mother could provide. He was ready to take on the world. But the world wasn't always ready for him. The day after the test, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the strange encounter with Mrs. Dawson after class. It wasn't even the looks he had gotten from some of the other students as they filed out of the room, whispers following him like shadows. No, it was the way everything felt just a little too heavy, like the world was waiting for him to slip up. He had expected some kind of tension. After all, he was used to people being skeptical when he outshined his peers. But this felt different. This time, it wasn't just about his grades. It was about his presence. About the fact that a black student from the South Side could excel in a space where so few like him were even allowed to enter. And that bothered people more than he'd anticipated. The next morning, he walked into Mrs. Dawson's classroom with a knot in his stomach. He had tried to prepare himself, to push down the anxiety that had been gnawing at him since yesterday. The feeling that something was about to happen, something big, was still there. When he entered the classroom, he noticed immediately that the usual hum of chatter among his classmates was absent. There was an unsettling silence in the room. Mrs. Dawson was standing at the front of the class, her eyes focused on the pile of test papers in front of her. She didn't acknowledge him as he walked in, which was unusual. Normally, she would at least give a friendly nod. Instead, she was absorbed in the papers, her face grim. Jamal dropped his backpack on the floor and sat down in his usual seat at the back of the room. He wasn't nervous about the test results, he knew he had aced it, but something about the way everyone was acting made him uneasy. As he pulled out his notebook, he caught sight of Sarah, a girl who sat 2 rows ahead of him. She was staring at him, her eyes narrowed. The kind of look that made his skin crawl. The bell rang, signaling the start of the period, and Mrs. Dawson cleared her throat, looking up at the class. The room went still, the kind of stillness that only happened when something was about to go terribly wrong. "Class, I'd like to talk about the recent test," Mrs. Dawson began, her voice calm but tense. "I've reviewed all of your papers, and while most of you did well, there's something that doesn't quite add up. Especially with you, Jamal." Jamal's heart sank. He knew what was coming. His worst fear was about to be realized. The class was silent, all eyes now fixed on him. He glanced quickly around the room, seeing the mixture of curiosity and suspicion in his classmates' faces. They weren't just looking at him, they were judging him. "Jamal," Mrs. Dawson continued, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "I noticed that your test results were unusually fast. You finished almost an hour before anyone else. And I've checked your answers. They're perfect. Too perfect. In fact, they're the kind of answers you'd expect from someone with a lot more experience. Or perhaps someone who had seen the test beforehand." A wave of disbelief washed over Jamal. Was she seriously accusing him of cheating? He stood up quickly, his fists clenched at his sides. "Mrs. Dawson, I didn't cheat." His voice was firm, but inside, his mind was racing. This was insane. He had worked harder for this than anyone knew. Why would she think that? "I'm just trying to understand, Jamal," Mrs. Dawson said, her voice cool and professional. "I know you're a smart kid, but this is unusual. It's not normal for someone your age to be this quick and accurate. And I'm sure you can understand why I'm concerned. Are you saying I cheated?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his blood was boiling. He wasn't going to let her accuse him of something he didn't do. He wasn't going to let her steal this moment from him. Mrs. Dawson hesitated, her eyes flicking to the rest of the class. "I'm not saying anything yet. But I'm going to have to report this to the principal. It's protocol." A cold shiver ran down Jamal's spine. "You don't have any proof that I cheated," he said, his voice low but filled with an intensity that even he could feel. "This is just because I'm different. You don't think I'm capable of this, do you?" There was a beat of silence, and for a moment, Jamal thought he saw a flicker of guilt cross Mrs. Dawson's face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I'll let the administration handle it," she said curtly, her tone no longer carrying the warmth it had before. "You're dismissed, Jamal." Jamal's chest tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The whole class was watching him now, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He turned and walked out of the classroom, trying to keep his head high, but inside, he felt like everything was crumbling. The walls of his world had just begun to close in on him. As soon as the door closed behind him, he stood in the hallway, his back pressed against the cool metal, his mind spinning. He could feel the heat rising in his face as the realization hit him. It wasn't about the test. It was about him. About the fact that he, a black boy from the South Side, had succeeded in a way that others couldn't understand. And because of that, they needed to tear him down. This wasn't just about academic success. This was about race. This was about expectations. And Jamal knew that he was going to have to fight harder than ever to prove that he belonged here. To prove that he wasn't a cheat. He wasn't a fraud. He was a genius. But the question was, could he survive this? Jamal couldn't concentrate. Not in class, not at home, not even for a second. The accusations swirling around him were too heavy. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Mrs. Dawson's face, her skeptical eyes, her carefully controlled voice accusing him of cheating. No matter how hard he tried to shake it off, it wouldn't go away. His mother, Rhonda, had been furious when he told her what happened. "What kind of school is this, Jamal? They should know you better than that," she had said, pacing the small apartment, her eyes flashing with a rare anger. But even though her words offered comfort, they didn't erase the knot in his stomach, the sense that he was about to be buried by a system that couldn't, or wouldn't, see him for who he truly was. By the time Jamal walked into school the next day, he already knew what to expect. Whispers followed him in the hallway, and when he passed Mrs. Dawson's classroom, he could feel the weight of the eyes on him through the windows. They were watching, waiting for him to slip. But Jamal refused to show any sign of weakness. He couldn't. Not now. When the bell rang for homeroom, he made his way to the office. There, sitting behind the desk, was Mr. Thompson, the principal of St. Augustine Prep. He was a tall man, with a neatly trimmed beard and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was the kind of principal who was always calm, collected, almost too calm. He had the air of someone who believed in doing things by the book, in following procedure even when it didn't make sense. Jamal could already tell that this was not going to be an easy conversation. "Jamal, come in," Mr. Thompson said with a strained smile, motioning toward a chair in front of his desk. "Please, sit down." Jamal didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He wasn't sure if it was the right move, but he wasn't going to sit there passively while they accused him of something he didn't do. "I assume you know why you're here?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "We've received a report about the recent test, and Mrs. Dawson has raised some concerns. I just want to go over the situation with you, Jamal. You understand, don't you?" Jamal nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "I know what you're trying to say. You think I cheated." Mr. Thompson sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Jamal, we don't want to think that. But the situation is complicated. The fact that you finished so quickly, and with such perfect answers, it raised some red flags. It's nothing personal. We're just following protocol." "Protocol," Jamal repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the air. "You're accusing me of cheating because I did my best. Because I'm fast. Because I'm good at math." Mr. Thompson's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "We're just doing our due diligence. We have to take these things seriously, Jamal. You're a smart kid, and we know you have potential. But you also need to understand that the system, this school, isn't used to seeing kids like you do so well. People are going to question it." There it was, the truth, finally slipping out between the words. Jamal wasn't just being questioned because of his test performance. He was being questioned because of his race. Because he was a black boy excelling in a space where so few black students had ever been allowed to thrive. Jamal's jaw clenched, his fists curling tightly at his sides. He was trying to stay calm, but the words felt like a slap in the face. "I didn't cheat," Jamal said again, his voice stronger this time. "I've been working for this my whole life. I didn't cheat." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, looking at him with a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. "I understand. I really do. But until we're sure, we have to follow procedure. There's going to be an investigation. We're going to look into everything, your test, the way you completed it, the timing, all of it. We have to make sure everything checks out." Jamal's heart sank. "An investigation? You're treating me like a criminal." "Jamal, no one's treating you like a criminal. We just need to get to the bottom of this." But the damage was already done. The suspicion was there. And now it was official. The investigation would hang over his head like a dark cloud, and Jamal knew that no matter how it ended, things would never be the same. "I didn't do anything wrong," Jamal repeated, the words now feeling hollow, as if he had to say them to convince himself, too. "I didn't cheat." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, but his face was unreadable. "I'll let you know what the next steps are. In the meantime, Jamal, just keep doing your best. That's all you can do." With that, Jamal left the office. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the stares of his classmates more piercing, more judgmental. His chest tightened with every step, but he forced himself to walk with his head high. No matter what happened, no matter how the investigation turned out, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let them break him. Later that day, Mrs. Dawson called Jamal into her classroom after school. He had been dreading this moment since the morning. When he stepped inside, she was standing at her desk, looking at him with the same cold, professional demeanor she had worn during their earlier conversation. Her eyes flicked over him, studying him as if he were some kind of puzzle she was trying to figure out. "Jamal, I want to give you the opportunity to explain yourself," she said. "I understand this is a difficult situation for you, but I need to know that you're being honest with me." "I'm just doing my job." Jamal didn't sit down. He couldn't. "I didn't cheat. I don't need to explain myself. If you really think I did something wrong, then fine, investigate it. But you'll see that I didn't do anything wrong." Mrs. Dawson didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sighed. "I wish I could believe you, Jamal. I really do. But I need to follow the rules. And sometimes, the rules don't make sense, but I have no choice." Jamal felt a surge of frustration. "So you're just going to treat me like a criminal? Like I'm some kind of cheater?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she just turned back to her desk, picking up a stack of papers. "You're dismissed." Jamal turned on his heel, slamming the door behind him as he left. The next few days dragged by like a slow-moving river, the current pulling Jamal under with every passing hour. The investigation, the whispers, the stares, it all felt like it was suffocating him. The entire school seemed to be watching, waiting for him to crack, waiting to see if the truth would come out, or if he would fall from grace. Jamal knew what they expected from him. They expected him to be quiet. They expected him to take the fall. They expected him to let the weight of their doubts crush him. But Jamal refused to be anyone's scapegoat. His mother, Rhonda, was furious about the whole situation. She didn't trust the school. She didn't trust the system. "You've got to fight back, baby," she told him one night after dinner, her voice sharp with determination. "If they want to put you in a box, you tear that box apart." Jamal wanted to believe her, but the weight of the world felt too heavy. It wasn't just the school. It was everything: the people who didn't think he belonged, the teachers who underestimated him, the classmates who either envied him or judged him. It was all of it. And now, this accusation, this slander, had given them all the perfect excuse to bring him down. The investigation had begun, but Jamal didn't know what that would mean. Would they question every paper he'd ever turned in? Would they dig into his life, trying to find any reason to paint him as a cheater? He had nothing to hide. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the idea of people poking around in his life, scrutinizing every detail, every action, was terrifying. He couldn't help but wonder if it would even matter if they found nothing. The accusation alone was enough to destroy his reputation. And he knew that no matter what, it was going to leave a stain. People would never look at him the same again. It was Friday afternoon when Jamal hit his breaking point. He had just finished his last class of the day, a math class that was supposed to be his refuge, his escape. But today, the numbers on the page felt like they were dancing, mocking him, telling him he wasn't good enough. His mind wasn't on the equations. It wasn't on anything except the looming investigation. As he grabbed his bag and made his way toward the door, he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. He spun around, startled, and found himself face to face with Sarah, his classmate, the one who had looked at him with suspicion ever since the test. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low but urgent. Jamal raised an eyebrow, suspicion flaring in his chest. "What about?" "It's not what you think," Sarah said, her eyes darting around the hallway as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "I'm not here to judge you, Jamal. I need you to know something." Jamal folded his arms, looking at her with a mix of confusion and skepticism. "What are you talking about?" She looked around once more before stepping closer, lowering her voice. "I think they're framing you." Jamal blinked. The words hit him like a slap across the face. "What do you mean, framing me?" "I don't know everything," Sarah continued, glancing over her shoulder. "But I know that Mrs. Dawson doesn't like you. And I know she's been working with the principal to make sure this investigation sticks." Jamal felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you saying? Are you telling me that they're trying to ruin me?" Sarah hesitated, her face contorting with doubt. "I'm not sure. But I've seen things. Little things. I don't know if you've noticed, but people are talking. People are whispering about how you got the test questions beforehand. About how you were the only one to finish so quickly. And it's not just Mrs. Dawson, there are others too." Jamal felt his stomach twist. He was being attacked, not just by one person, but by the whole system. The people who had been rooting for him to fail. Who had been waiting for a mistake. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Sarah said, her eyes shifting nervously. "But I don't think you deserve this. I've seen how hard you work, Jamal. I've seen how much you put into everything you do. You don't deserve to be treated like this." Jamal nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. This was all wrong. It wasn't just a random accusation. Someone with power, was using the system to take him down. They were trying to break him, to make him small, to make him invisible. And they were almost succeeding. "I've got to go," Jamal said suddenly, his voice tight. "I can't, this isn't right. I can't just sit back and let them do this to me." Sarah grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Jamal, listen to me. Don't fight them alone. Get help. You don't have to do this by yourself." But Jamal shook her off. "I don't have time for that," he said, his voice hard. "They think they can control me. They think they can break me. But they're wrong." With that, he turned and walked away, his mind set on one thing: he was going to fight back. He wasn't going to let anyone take away what he had earned, what he had worked for. Jamal knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew it wasn't going to be fair. But he also knew one thing: he wasn't going to give up. As he walked through the school doors and into the cold afternoon air, Jamal's determination grew. No matter what it took, he was going to prove them wrong. He was going to fight for his future. He wasn't going to let them frame him. Jamal's resolve solidified as the weekend loomed ahead. He had spent every waking moment since that conversation with Sarah in the library, piecing together what had happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, scrutinized from every angle. The accusation of cheating was no longer just a stain on his academic record, it was a scar that seemed to cut deeper into his very identity. The weekend, however, was not as restful as he had hoped. Rhonda had been on the phone for hours, speaking to anyone who would listen: family, friends, even local activists who might have an interest in the case. She was determined to get to the bottom of it, but Jamal felt overwhelmed by the direction things were taking. He knew his mother meant well, but there was only so much she could do. The system was stacked against him, and it felt as though no one outside of his small circle of friends understood just how serious this was. On Sunday, Jamal finally reached out to the one person he thought could help: Malik. Malik had been Jamal's best friend since elementary school. A quiet but fiercely loyal guy, Malik understood Jamal better than anyone else. And if there was anyone who could help him navigate through this mess, it was Malik. The two met at the local park, under the shade of an old oak tree, where they often hung out when things got tough. It was one of the few places that felt like a safe haven to Jamal, away from the prying eyes of the school and the suffocating expectations of the world around him. "Man, you look like you haven't slept in days," Malik said, his tone filled with concern as he handed Jamal a bottle of water. Jamal took it but didn't drink. He was too wound up. "I haven't. I've been trying to figure out what to do next. You know what's happening at school, right?" Malik nodded, his face tight with frustration. "Yeah, I've heard the rumors. Everyone's talking about it, man. But I don't get it. You didn't cheat. You've always been good at this stuff. Everyone knows it." Jamal sighed, his mind racing. "But that's the problem, Malik. People don't know me. They don't care about how hard I work or how long I study. All they see is a black kid in a school where there aren't many of us doing well. I'm an anomaly, and that makes them nervous." Malik frowned, shaking his head. "That's messed up, bro. They're supposed to be supporting you, not tearing you down." "I know. But they won't. I've got to figure out a way to prove that I didn't cheat." "But how do I do that when everyone's already made up their mind?" Malik leaned back against the tree, thinking for a moment. "You need to go straight to the source. Go to the administration. Go to Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Dawson. If they're going to accuse you of something like this, they should at least have the decency to be transparent about it. If you go to them with evidence that they're wrong, maybe it'll help. But you've got to do it calmly. You can't let them see you sweat." Jamal stared at his friend, processing the idea. It was a solid plan, but there was a part of him that still feared what might happen if he confronted the people who held all the power. Would they even listen to him, or would they just double down on the accusation? He had already seen what happens when black students speak up. They're often dismissed or worse, punished for challenging authority. But as he looked at Malik, he realized his friend was right. Jamal wasn't just going to sit back and let them steamroll him. He had to take action, not just for himself, but for every student who had ever been made to feel invisible. He owed it to them to stand up. "You're right," Jamal said finally. "I'm going to do it. But I need something concrete. I need to show them that I didn't cheat, that there's no reason for any of this. If I can prove it, maybe they'll back off." Malik's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" "I'm going to talk to the people who were there. The ones who took the test with me. They can vouch for me. They saw me take the test. They know I didn't cheat." Malik smiled, a little bit of pride showing in his expression. "I got your back, bro. I'll help you gather the evidence you need. We'll get this sorted out." "Thanks, man," Jamal said, feeling a little lighter. "It's not just about clearing my name, though. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. You know how it is." "I know," Malik said. "And I've got your back on that too. Let's do this." The next day, Jamal walked into school with a new sense of purpose. The whispers were still there, but they felt distant now. The stares, the rumors, the assumptions, they no longer held as much power over him. If anything, they only fueled his resolve to prove everyone wrong. He met Malik before school started, and together, they began gathering statements from the other students who had taken the test with Jamal. It wasn't easy. Some of them were too scared to speak up, worried about the repercussions if they went against the administration. But a few of them, like Nate, a quiet kid from his history class, agreed to help. "I saw Jamal finish the test in under an hour," Nate said, his voice shaking a little. "But he wasn't just guessing. He was working through it. He wasn't rushing. I can tell the difference between someone who's just filling in answers and someone who knows what they're doing." "Thanks, Nate," Jamal said, feeling a surge of hope. This was the kind of testimony he needed. It wasn't just his word against theirs anymore. He had allies now. By lunchtime, Jamal and Malik had gathered statements from 3 other students who had seen him take the test. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They were all planning to meet with Mr. Thompson that afternoon after school, ready to confront the accusations head-on. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Jamal felt a mix of dread and anticipation. This was it, the moment of truth. The air in the school seemed heavier as Jamal and Malik made their way to the administration office after school. Each step felt like it took longer than the last, as if the hallways were stretching, prolonging the inevitable. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, his palms sweating. Despite the statements they'd gathered, despite the evidence they'd put together, there was still that lingering fear: what if it wasn't enough? The doors to Mr. Thompson's office loomed ahead, and Jamal felt his stomach churn. Malik gave him a quick look of reassurance. "You got this, man," he said softly, nudging him forward. Jamal took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The room was sterile and silent, with only the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Dawson stood to the side, arms crossed, her sharp eyes narrowing as they entered. There was no warmth, no welcome. This was a battlefield, and Jamal was about to walk into the lion's den. "Sit down, Jamal," Mr. Thompson said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Jamal hesitated, then pulled the chair out and sat down, straightening his back. Malik took a spot by the door, standing tall as if to be a silent guard. Jamal knew that Malik was his ally, but there was still an overwhelming sense of isolation that surrounded him. It was him against the system. A system that had already made up its mind about him. Mr. Thompson looked at him with a mixture of pity and condescension. "I'm sure you understand why we're here, Jamal," he began. "The allegations against you are serious, and we need to get to the bottom of this." Jamal met his gaze, steady and calm. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "But I didn't cheat. I don't know how this happened, but I've got proof that I didn't do what you're accusing me of." Mrs. Dawson stepped forward, her voice sharp. "The proof is in your test scores, Jamal. You completed the exam far faster than anyone else, and your answers were nearly flawless. That kind of performance doesn't just happen unless I cheated." Jamal interrupted, feeling the heat rise in his chest. "I studied for that test for weeks, Mrs. Dawson. I knew the material. I didn't need to cheat to do well." Mr. Thompson held up a hand, signaling for Mrs. Dawson to back down. "Jamal, we're just trying to understand what happened. It's not an accusation, we're looking for the truth." "I'm telling you the truth," Jamal said, leaning forward, his voice rising slightly. "I did nothing wrong. And I have statements from my classmates who can back that up." Malik stepped forward, holding a folder in his hand. He handed it to Mr. Thompson, who opened it and began scanning the pages. Mrs. Dawson's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent for now. "These are statements from students who were in the same testing room as Jamal," Malik said, his tone measured. "They can vouch for the fact that he didn't cheat. They saw him taking the test. They saw how carefully he worked through the questions." Mr. Thompson glanced at the papers, then back at Jamal. "You've got people saying you didn't cheat. That's good, but we still need to understand why you finished so quickly. It's unusual." Jamal's fists clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "It's not unusual for me. I've always been good at tests. I've always been good at math, and I've always studied hard. I've worked for everything I've earned, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me." Mrs. Dawson scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's a nice story, Jamal, but stories don't explain the evidence." Jamal didn't flinch. He could feel the weight of her judgment, but he wasn't going to let it shake him. "What evidence are you talking about, Mrs. Dawson?" "All I see is an assumption based on a stereotype." You're not looking at the facts, you're looking at my skin color and making conclusions. There was a sharp intake of breath from both adults in the room, but Jamal wasn't done. The words had been building up inside him for days, and now they were pouring out, unstoppable. You see me, and you see a black kid who shouldn't be at the top of the class. You see a kid who doesn't fit the mold of what you expect. And now that I've outperformed everyone, it's easier to call me a cheater than to admit that maybe I just worked harder than everyone else. Maybe I'm just good at what I do. The room fell silent. Mr. Thompson stared at him, his expression hard to read. Mrs. Dawson opened her mouth to respond, but Jamal cut her off. If you want to investigate me, that's fine, Jamal continued. But you need to investigate the real reason this is happening. You need to ask yourselves why you're so quick to assume the worst of me. You need to ask yourselves why you're so willing to tear me down, instead of celebrating my success. Jamal could feel the tide shifting. The air had changed. His words weren't just accusations, they were truths that both Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Dawson had no choice but to confront. The fight wasn't just about the test. It was about the biases that ran deep in the school system, the preconceived notions that made it easier to tear him down than to support him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Mr. Thompson put the papers down and leaned back in his chair, his gaze locked on Jamal. I hear you, he said slowly, his voice surprisingly calm. We'll take everything into consideration. But understand that this isn't over. We'll need to talk to everyone involved. This situation is complicated. Complicated? Jamal repeated. It's not complicated. Either you believe I'm telling the truth, or you don't. You can keep looking for things to use against me, or you can do the right thing and clear my name. For the first time since the meeting started, Mrs. Dawson's face softened, just a little. But it was Mr. Thompson who finally spoke. We'll look into this, Jamal. But be aware, this won't be a quick process. Jamal stood up, his resolve as strong as ever. I'll be waiting. As he and Malik left the office, the tension that had built up inside Jamal slowly began to unravel. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. But for the first time in days, he felt like he had taken control of the situation. He had stood up for himself. He had spoken the truth. And that truth, he knew, was powerful. The next few days at school felt like a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Jamal had laid the groundwork for the confrontation. He'd spoken his truth. But as much as he wanted the school to come to its senses and clear his name, a nagging feeling told him that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd only grown louder. Jamal couldn't walk through the halls without hearing snatches of conversation, people muttering behind his back. Some of them were supportive, those who had seen him struggle, study, and rise above the odds. Others, however, were quick to condemn him, convinced that he'd somehow gotten away with cheating. The tension hung thick in the air like fog, and Jamal's every move felt under scrutiny. He hadn't heard from Mr. Thompson or Mrs. Dawson since their meeting, which made Jamal even more uneasy. What were they doing? Were they really investigating, or had they already made up their minds? He couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for him to slip up, to give them a reason to double down on their accusations. It wasn't until Thursday morning that he received a call from Mr. Thompson's office. Jamal felt his stomach twist when he saw the caller ID flash on his phone. He picked up immediately. Hello. Jamal, it's Mr. Thompson, the principal said, his voice even. I need you to come by my office after school today. We've gathered all the information, and I think it's time we discuss your case. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, or dreading, depending on how you looked at it. Okay, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'll be there. As the final bell rang that afternoon, Jamal met Malik outside the administration building. Malik's face was tight with tension, clearly as anxious as Jamal was. You ready for this? Malik asked, eyeing Jamal closely. Jamal nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. As ready as I'll ever be. The two walked together through the halls, heading toward the office. Jamal's mind was a blur of thoughts. The past few days had been a whirlwind of stress, emotions, and uncertainty. The last thing he wanted was to sit down with Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Dawson again, only to face another round of accusations, more doubt, and more frustration. But he couldn't back down now. He'd already taken a stand, and he wasn't going to let anyone push him back into the shadows. When they entered the office, Jamal was surprised to see not just Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Dawson, but also a third figure in the room, a tall man with graying hair and a somber expression. Jamal didn't recognize him immediately, but his professional demeanor told Jamal that he was someone important, perhaps even someone with the power to make real decisions about what happened next. Jamal, this is Dr. Stevens, Mr. Thompson said, motioning toward the man. He's from the district office. We've brought him in to help mediate the situation. Jamal didn't know how to feel about that. On one hand, it was reassuring to know that someone outside the immediate school environment was involved. On the other hand, it felt like an attempt to distance themselves from the problem. As if the school was trying to deflect responsibility and put the onus on someone else. Hello, Jamal, Dr. Stevens said, offering a thin smile. I've been briefed on the situation, and I'm here to make sure that everything is handled fairly. We want to get to the bottom of this and make sure we're not jumping to conclusions. Jamal met Dr. Stevens' gaze, weighing his words carefully. He wasn't sure if the man was genuinely there to help or if he was just another cog in the machine designed to protect the status quo. But for now, he had no choice but to play along. Thank you, Jamal said politely, though the unease in his chest hadn't disappeared. Mr. Thompson gestured for him to sit, and Jamal complied, taking a seat across from the desk. Malik remained standing by the door, his presence a constant reminder that Jamal wasn't facing this alone. We've gone over the statements from your classmates, Mr. Thompson began. And we've also looked at your test. After discussing it with Dr. Stevens, we believe that while the situation is certainly unusual, there's no concrete evidence to support the cheating allegations. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. He didn't dare hope just yet. So, you're clearing my name? We're not clearing your name just yet, Mrs. Dawson interjected, her voice sharp. But we're not accusing you of cheating either. What we have here is a situation where your performance raised questions. But based on the evidence we have now, we're willing to put this to rest without any further action. Jamal's mind raced. So, that's it? No consequences. No suspension. No marks on my record. That's right, Dr. Stevens said, his voice calm but firm. We're going to move forward without taking any disciplinary action. But I want to make it clear, Jamal, that this is a delicate situation. It's important for you to understand that this isn't about what you did wrong. It's about how things might have been perceived. Jamal felt the tension in his shoulders loosen. He hadn't realized just how much he'd been holding on to the hope that this would end in his favor. For the first time in days, the pressure began to lift. But I still want to be clear, Dr. Stevens continued, while there will be no formal punishment, we are going to monitor this closely. There's been a lot of talk, and we want to make sure that nothing like this happens again. Jamal could feel his heart sink again, but he refused to let it show. I understand, he said, keeping his voice steady. But I just want to say this. I'm not some anomaly. I'm not a cheat, and I'm not some exception. I'm just a student who worked hard. If you want to monitor things, fine. But don't use me as some scapegoat to make yourselves feel better about a flawed system. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Jamal wasn't sure if he'd gone too far. But then Mr. Thompson spoke up, his voice softer now. I hear you, Jamal, he said. And I think you've made your point. Jamal stood up, his legs a little shaky but his head held high. Thank you, he said, though the words didn't feel like enough. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to keep working hard, and I'm going to keep proving everyone wrong. As he turned to leave, Malik gave him a nod of approval. They'd made it through this round, but Jamal knew that the battle wasn't over. He had a lot more to prove, not just to the school, but to himself. Jamal had hoped that the ordeal would be over after the meeting in Mr. Thompson's office. He had gotten through the worst of it, his name cleared, at least for now, but there was an unsettling quietness that followed. The tension that had gripped the school for weeks hadn't disappeared. It lingered in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't quite burned out, and Jamal knew it was only a matter of time before it flared up again. But for the time being, Jamal tried to focus on his schoolwork. It wasn't easy. Every glance from his classmates felt like a judgment, a reminder that no matter what he did, there would always be people who would see him as the cheater, as the outlier. The whispers never fully stopped. They just faded into a dull murmur, still present, but not as loud as before. The next few days felt like a blur. Jamal buried himself in his books, trying to prove not only to the school but to himself that he was more than just the rumor mill that had spun around him. Every test he took, every assignment he completed, he did it with a fierce determination, trying to erase the stain that had been cast on his reputation. But then came the new challenge. It was Monday morning when Jamal saw the email. The subject line read, Math Department, Advanced Placement Exam. He frowned and opened the message. The email was from Mrs. Dawson, and it contained an invitation to take the upcoming AP Calculus exam. Dear Jamal, the email began, we believe you have the potential to excel in this course. After our recent discussions and the results of your recent assessments, I'm recommending you for the Advanced Placement Calculus exam. If you accept, you will have the opportunity to take the exam and possibly earn college credit for the course. Jamal blinked. He couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, Mrs. Dawson, one of the people who had accused him of cheating, was now offering him an opportunity that could change the trajectory of his future. AP Calculus. College credit. It was the kind of chance that he had been working toward for years. But there was something about the timing that felt off. Was this a genuine offer? Or was it a way for the school to control the narrative? If he took the exam and succeeded, they could say, see. He's just that good. We were right to doubt him. Look at how well he did. But if he failed, it would only add fuel to the fire of the accusations against him. Still, this was an opportunity Jamal couldn't ignore. AP exams were prestigious, and earning college credit was an achievement he could hold on to for the rest of his life. This was his chance to show everyone, not just the school, but the world, that he was capable of more than they had ever given him credit for. He stared at the screen for a long moment, considering his options. Finally, he clicked accept. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Jamal studied with an intensity that left little room for anything else. He barely had time for his friends, for his family, or for anything other than the calculus problems that seemed to multiply in front of him. But every equation, every formula, every concept became a weapon in his hands. This exam would be his redemption, his opportunity to prove that he wasn't just a statistic or a stereotype. And yet, even as he worked tirelessly, there was an ever-present weight hanging over him. Mrs. Dawson, who had been one of his harshest critics, was suddenly his biggest supporter. But Jamal couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of a bigger game. Was she truly trying to help him? Or was she still trying to trap him in some way? The night before the exam, Jamal sat at his desk, the glow of his lamp illuminating his books and notes. He was exhausted, mentally and physically, but he couldn't stop now. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Malik knocked on his door, pushing it open. He stood there for a second, watching Jamal with a quiet intensity. "You good, man?" he asked. Jamal didn't look up from his notes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to make sure I'm ready." "You've been at this for hours," Malik said, his tone gentle but concerned. "You've got this. Don't burn yourself out." Jamal finally looked up, meeting Malik's gaze. I don't know if I've got this, Malik. I don't know if I can trust the school. I don't know if they're setting me up again. This whole thing, it just feels wrong. Malik stepped into the room and pulled up a chair. I get it, man. But think about it this way, you've been through so much already. They can't keep knocking you down. You've already proven that you're smarter than they thought. Now, you've got a chance to show them what you're really made of. Jamal nodded slowly. Yeah, but what if I fail? What if it's just one more thing they can use to say I'm not good enough? Malik shook his head. Don't worry about that. You're not doing this for them. You're doing it for you. You've earned this, Jamal. You're smart. You're capable. And no one can take that from you. Jamal exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just a little. He knew Malik was right. He had to do this for himself, not for anyone else. Thanks, man, Jamal said quietly. Malik smiled, then stood up. You're going to kill it tomorrow. I'll be right here cheering you on. Jamal watched as Malik left the room, the door closing quietly behind him. As the silence returned, Jamal couldn't help but feel a sense of determination building inside him. This wasn't just about passing an exam. It was about proving something much bigger. It was about showing that his genius couldn't be hidden, no matter what anyone tried to do to him. The next day, Jamal walked into the testing room with his head held high. The tension was palpable as he sat down at his desk, the AP Calculus exam in front of him. He glanced around the room, noticing a few familiar faces, students who had seen him struggle and who had heard the rumors. Jamal didn't let it faze him. He knew what he had to do. He picked up his pencil, cracked his knuckles, and turned to the first question. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second a reminder of the pressure building inside Jamal's chest. His hands hovered over the first page of the AP Calculus exam, but despite the intensity of the moment, his mind was surprisingly clear. The chaos of the past weeks, the accusations, the rumors, the whispers, faded into the background as he focused solely on the questions in front of him. Jamal took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a brief second, and then opened them again, allowing the familiar equations and formulas to flood his mind. This was the moment he had been preparing for. Not just the last few days, but the last several years of his life. Every late night spent studying, every lesson learned under the harsh light of determination, it had all led to this. The room was silent except for the occasional rustling of papers, the shuffle of a pencil, the quiet breath of his peers. Jamal ignored the rest of the room. He didn't care about the others. He only cared about proving himself. The first question was a breeze, limit theory, something he had mastered weeks ago. He scribbled the answer quickly, then moved on. The second question was a bit trickier, related rates. Jamal hesitated for a split second, but only because he wanted to double-check his work. He had been through this before in his practice exams. His mind raced through the steps, visualizing the problem in his head, before he wrote the solution with precision. For the next hour, Jamal flew through the exam. The questions were challenging, but not impossible. He had faced worse. There were moments when his hand would cramp from writing too quickly, or his mind would momentarily lose track of a small detail. But each time, he paused, took a deep breath, and regained his focus. He had always been good at math, but this wasn't just about skills. It was about proving something far greater, about showing that he was not the stereotype they tried to force on him. He wasn't the troubled student who got by through shortcuts or dishonesty. He was Jamal, the kid who fought for everything he had, and now he was going to show everyone that he deserved the same opportunities as anyone else. After 2 hours, Jamal looked at the clock. 30 minutes left. He had answered every question except for the last one, a challenging problem involving multiple variables and integration. His mind buzzed with calculations as he stared at the problem, trying to find a way in. He bit his lip, thinking hard, and then slowly, carefully, the solution started to take shape. This was the final stretch, the moment where he either sank or swam. He worked through the problem step by step, each part of the equation a small victory in itself. As the clock ticked down, he finally wrote the last number, checked it twice, and leaned back in his seat with a sigh of relief. Done. Jamal looked up, glancing around the room. Some of the other students were still working, their heads bent over their papers. A few were visibly anxious, fidgeting in their seats, while others, like him, seemed to be finished but were waiting for the official signal to turn in their papers. But Jamal didn't care about them. He'd done it. He had given it everything. For once, the fear that had haunted him, whether he would fail or succeed, whether he would prove everyone wrong, faded completely. For the first time in weeks, he felt a quiet sense of peace. When the proctor announced that time was up, Jamal stood up with the rest of the class and walked to the front of the room to submit his test. As he placed his exam on the stack, he felt an overwhelming sense of finality. No matter what happened from here, he had done his best. He had faced the challenge head-on, and for once, the pressure felt manageable. But as he made his way back to his seat, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would the school accept the results? Would they use his success as proof of his capability, or would they dismiss it as a fluke? He didn't have the answers, but he knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't be the same person who walked into that exam room earlier that morning. He had learned something profound about himself, that his worth wasn't tied to other people's opinions or the labels they tried to impose on him. It was something deeper, something more resilient. And that was something no one could take away. As Jamal walked out of the testing room and back into the chaos of the school day, he felt different. The usual noise of the hallways seemed quieter, somehow. He had just taken the most important test of his life, not just the AP exam, but the test of his resolve, of his determination to prove that he was capable of more than anyone thought. The world around him hadn't changed, but Jamal had. And that made all the difference. The days following the AP calculus exam were a strange mix of impatience and anticipation. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about the test, every question, every calculation, every little mistake he might have made. His mind kept racing, but there was no way to know for sure how well he had done. The only thing he could do now was wait. The wait itself, however, was a whole different challenge. It wasn't just about the test results, it was about everything that came before and everything that might follow. Would the school acknowledge his success? Or would they chalk it up to luck? The rumors, the accusations, they still loomed over him like a dark cloud. He had cleared his name in some ways, but in others, the stain of the past still clung to him, like a shadow that refused to fade. Jamal tried to focus on other things, but it was hard. He kept his nose buried in his books, taking on extra assignments and challenges just to keep his mind occupied. Yet, no matter how much he tried, his thoughts always circled back to that exam. The silence from the administration was deafening. They hadn't said anything, and he had no idea when they would. Would it be a few days? A few weeks? The tension in the air around him was palpable. His classmates, some of whom had watched him struggle, were now looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. A few even seemed to offer him a quiet nod of support, though none of them dared speak directly to him. Jamal had become a figure in the school's narrative, a symbol of defiance, of triumph over adversity, but he wasn't sure if he liked the role they had cast him in. One afternoon, just a few days after the exam, Jamal was walking to his locker when he noticed a small group of students gathered near the bulletin board. Their murmurs were soft but intense, and as he approached, he heard his name mentioned. "Did you hear?" one girl asked. "They're talking about Jamal in the next faculty meeting." "What about him?" another student replied. "I heard he crushed that AP exam." "Is it true?" The first girl hesitated, glancing around. "I don't know. But if he did, it would be pretty amazing." They wouldn't let him take the exam if they didn't believe in him, right? Jamal's stomach tightened. His heart beat a little faster as he stood there, unnoticed by the group. They were talking about him, but it wasn't clear if it was with admiration or if they were just speculating. He couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning, if more rumors would start to spread, if the whispers would grow louder, or if they would finally begin to see him as the person he was rather than the one they had invented. He quickly shut his locker and walked away, not wanting to linger any longer. The next day, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, Jamal received an unexpected email. It was from Mrs. Dawson. Subject: AP Calculus Exam Results. Dear Jamal, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to take a moment to congratulate you on your performance in the AP Calculus exam. Your results were nothing short of impressive. In fact, I am recommending you for placement in our most advanced math courses for next year. You've shown exceptional skill and promise, and it is clear that your abilities extend far beyond what we initially anticipated. I am proud of your hard work and dedication, and I look forward to seeing all that you will accomplish moving forward. Jamal read the email twice, trying to process what he had just read. He couldn't help but smile. He had done it. He had passed the exam, and not just passed, but excelled. Mrs. Dawson, the very person who had doubted him, was now acknowledging his brilliance. This was validation in a way he hadn't expected, a reminder that his efforts had paid off. But even as pride swelled in his chest, a part of him remained wary. What did this mean for the rumors? Would the school finally accept him, or was this just a way for them to cover their tracks? Jamal quickly responded to the email, expressing his gratitude and accepting the offer to join the advanced math courses. But as he clicked send, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the true battle was still ahead of him. This was just one small victory, but it didn't erase the bigger struggle he had yet to face. The following week, Jamal was called into Mr. Thompson's office again. This time, it wasn't for a confrontation, but rather a conversation about the future. Jamal walked in with a sense of cautious optimism. Mr. Thompson, the principal, was sitting behind his desk, but he looked up and smiled when Jamal entered. Jamal, I wanted to personally congratulate you on your outstanding performance on the AP Calculus exam, Mr. Thompson began, his tone warm but measured. I've been reviewing your results, and I'm thoroughly impressed. Jamal nodded, still processing the situation. Thank you, sir. We've been discussing your future here at the school, and I want to make sure we're offering you all the opportunities you deserve, Mr. Thompson continued. You've proven that you're ready for more advanced coursework, and we're planning to place you in the most challenging courses available. This could open doors for you in terms of college admissions, scholarships. Jamal listened carefully, but his mind wandered for a moment. He couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Thompson's congratulations were entirely sincere or if they were just a way to smooth things over. Could they really be that supportive now, after everything that had happened? I appreciate the opportunity, Jamal said, his voice steady but cautious. I'm excited for the chance to prove myself even more. Mr. Thompson smiled again. I have no doubt that you'll succeed, Jamal. And I want you to know that I'll be here to support you, every step of the way. Just keep doing what you're doing. Jamal left the office feeling a mix of pride and uncertainty. It was hard to shake the feeling that this was all a bit too late. They were finally acknowledging his genius, but what about the months of being branded as the cheater? What about the judgment that had followed him throughout the halls of the school? He had earned this moment, but the question lingered, would they ever see him for who he truly was? Or would he always be a symbol of something else, a piece in a story they were still trying to write? Jamal didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let anyone write his story for him. He had taken control of his future, and that was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following Jamal's acceptance into the advanced math courses were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. While his success in the AP Calculus exam had earned him a lot of positive attention, it had also sparked a quiet undercurrent of resentment among some students and even a few teachers. No one was willing to say it outright, but the murmurs, the sideways glances, and the occasional whispered comment told Jamal all he needed to know: they weren't ready to accept him. It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. In the cafeteria one afternoon, Jamal sat down at his usual spot at the back of the room, a place where he could keep to himself. The crowd was thinner than usual today, as it was a half-day and many students had left early. Jamal unwrapped his sandwich and settled in, trying to ignore the low buzz of conversation around him. But as soon as he sat down, a group of students who'd been talking at the table next to him went silent. Jamal looked up, his eyes meeting the gaze of Marcus, a student who had always been one of the most vocal critics of his accomplishments. Marcus stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back a little too loudly. "I don't know about you guys," he said, turning to the rest of the table. "But I'm still trying to figure out how Jamal suddenly becomes a genius overnight. I mean, we all saw the test scores, right? Something doesn't add up." Jamal's heart sank. He knew where this was going, and he hated that it was happening again. The familiar feeling of being singled out, of being unfairly judged, settled over him like a heavy weight. "Don't you think it's a little suspicious how he got into the advanced math class?" Marcus continued, his voice rising. "I mean, he wasn't even supposed to take the AP exam in the first place. And now suddenly he's acing it. That's a little too convenient, don't you think?" A few of the students at Marcus's table murmured in agreement, but Jamal refused to let their words take root in his mind. He wasn't going to let them drag him down again. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You can think what you want," he said, his voice steady but firm, "but I earned my spot just like anyone else. I worked hard for this. And I won't let anyone take that away from me." For a moment, the room was silent. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He wasn't going to let them define him. Not this time. Marcus narrowed his eyes, clearly not used to being confronted. "You've got a lot of nerve, man," he spat. "We all know you're just trying to prove something. But it's not going to change the fact that you're not one of us." Jamal felt a surge of anger, but he took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. "You don't get it," he said, his voice low but intense. "It's not about proving anything to you. It's about proving to myself that I'm worth more than the labels you've been putting on me. I'm not some statistic or a stereotype. I'm Jamal. And that's all I need to be." He could see the shock in Marcus's eyes, but he didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, his shoulders squared, his head held high. The weight of their judgment was still heavy, but this time, it didn't crush him. As Jamal walked out of the cafeteria, he felt a strange sense of relief. He had spoken his truth, and that was enough. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their validation. He was done fighting for a seat at the table. He was going to build his own. The next morning, Jamal found a new email waiting for him in his inbox. This one was from Mrs. Dawson, the AP calculus teacher who had once doubted him. Her words were brief but pointed. Subject: Advanced Course Placement. Jamal. I wanted to follow up on our previous discussion regarding your placement in the advanced math courses. I've spoken with the school's academic board, and while they have some concerns about your readiness, they've agreed to allow you to proceed with the advanced curriculum for the time being. However, they have made it clear that your performance will be closely monitored over the next few months. I encourage you to stay focused and continue demonstrating the same level of commitment you've shown thus far. Jamal read the email 3 times, his mind racing. On the one hand, this was the validation he had been hoping for, a clear acknowledgement that his success was not a fluke. On the other hand, there was the undeniable weight of the school's skepticism. They weren't exactly offering him an open invitation, they were offering a trial period, a probation of sorts, where his every move would be scrutinized. Jamal's frustration bubbled to the surface. He had worked so hard, fought so tirelessly to prove himself, and yet they still didn't fully believe in him. They still saw him as an outsider, as someone who had to constantly prove his worth. But as he sat back in his chair, staring at the email, he realized something. This wasn't about their approval. It never had been. This was about proving to himself that he was capable. He didn't need the school to validate him. He had already validated himself by surviving everything they'd thrown at him. That afternoon, Jamal found himself in his usual spot on the school's track field. He had been coming here a lot lately, trying to clear his mind, letting the steady rhythm of his footsteps drown out the noise. The track had always been a place of peace for him, where he could think, where he could process everything that had happened. As he jogged the final lap, he noticed someone waiting by the gate. It was Raquel, a girl from his advanced English class who had been one of the few people who genuinely supported him from the start. She waved as he approached, her smile warm and encouraging. "Hey, Jamal," she said as he slowed to a walk. "I heard about the email. Congratulations." "Thanks," Jamal replied, though his voice was tinged with frustration. "It's just. I don't know. It feels like they still don't really trust me. They're watching me like I'm a ticking time bomb." Raquel gave him a sympathetic look. "I get it. But I think they're just scared. You're doing things that no one thought you could. They don't know how to handle that. But you've already proved them wrong, Jamal. You've got the skills. You've got the drive. And you've got me in your corner." Jamal smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Raquel. It means a lot. You've got this," she said with a wink. "Now get out there and show them what you're made of." Jamal nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders lighten just a little. He wasn't in this fight alone. He had Raquel, and he had himself. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough. Jamal sat in his new advanced math class, staring at the equation on the whiteboard. His hand hovered over the paper, ready to write, but something inside him felt off. The pressure was mounting, more than he'd anticipated. The scrutiny from his peers, the teacher's skepticism, it was all beginning to take a toll. Every test, every assignment, every word spoken felt like another obstacle, another challenge he had to face. He had made it this far, but the weight of constantly needing to prove himself was becoming unbearable. His hands, despite being steady just a few weeks ago, now trembled ever so slightly as he picked up his pencil. "I know you can do this, Jamal," he whispered to himself, trying to push the doubts away. But his mind kept returning to the thought, what if I'm not good enough? It wasn't just the class that was weighing him down. Jamal had started to notice the small, quiet things. The sidelong glances from the other students, the quiet whispers behind his back. The constant questioning of whether he was there because he deserved to be or simply because they felt sorry for him. It was in the air, a tension that even the walls of the classroom couldn't contain. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session of solving integrals and derivatives, Jamal grabbed his things and quickly left the classroom, eager to escape the feeling of being under a microscope. As he walked through the hallways, the school seemed more like a maze than ever. He could hear his footsteps echoing off the lockers, and each step felt heavier than the last. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a text from Raquel. "Raquel, you okay? You've been quiet lately." Jamal hesitated for a moment before responding. "Jamal, yeah. Just trying to keep up with everything." He put his phone away and continued walking. He passed a few familiar faces, some of them nodding at him in passing, but none of them spoke. There was always that unspoken tension now. Jamal couldn't help but feel like he was still being judged, still being labeled. As he made his way outside to the courtyard, he saw a group of students gathered near the benches. He recognized them instantly, Marcus, along with a couple of other guys from his math class. They were laughing, their voices carrying across the courtyard. Jamal felt the familiar sting of anxiety, the familiar feeling of being an outsider. He was about to turn and walk the other way when Marcus called out to him. "Hey, Jamal." Marcus's voice was louder than it needed to be, and it made Jamal stop in his tracks. Jamal turned, trying to mask the unease he felt. "What's up, Marcus?" Marcus gave him a smirk, and Jamal could see the challenge in his eyes. "You think you're so special now, huh? All this talk about you being some math genius, and yet, I've seen your last few assignments. You're barely passing." Jamal felt a surge of frustration. He had worked so hard, had fought so many battles to get here, and yet here was Marcus, just one more person trying to chip away at his confidence. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Don't let your ego get in the way of reality, man," Marcus continued, stepping closer. "You don't belong in that advanced class. You're just taking up space." Jamal's heart was pounding now, and the anger was beginning to boil. He had heard this all before, but it hurt even more now. "You don't know me," Jamal said, his voice tight. "You don't know what I've been through to get here. You think I don't belong? I'm here because I earned it. I've earned every damn minute of it." Marcus laughed, clearly amused by Jamal's anger. "You keep telling yourself that, but deep down, you know you're not good enough. You don't have what it takes." The words stung. They hit Jamal like a punch in the gut, leaving him momentarily breathless. For a second, he couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could hear was Marcus's voice, repeating those same words over and over in his mind. "You're not good enough." He took a step back, trying to steady himself. The last thing he wanted was to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. But it wasn't just Marcus, there were other people in the courtyard, too. The looks of disapproval, the quiet judgment. It felt like the whole world was watching him, waiting for him to fail. Without another word, Jamal turned and walked away. He couldn't stay there, not with that pressure bearing down on him. He had to escape, to get away from the voices in his head and the cruel words that followed him like a shadow. Later that evening, Jamal sat in his room, staring at the homework assignment in front of him. His books lay open on the desk, but his mind was a million miles away. He felt exhausted, mentally drained. No matter how hard he tried to concentrate, the pressure kept mounting. The anxiety, the fear that he wasn't good enough, it was suffocating. He thought about Raquel's text. Maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't okay. But what could he do? He had pushed so hard to get here, to prove everyone wrong, but the closer he got to his goal, the more the walls seemed to close in around him. The knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Jamal." It was his mother's voice. "Can I come in?" He nodded, not bothering to look up. His mom walked in and sat on the edge of his bed, her expression soft but concerned. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently. "I know things haven't been easy, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You're doing great, Jamal." Jamal let out a frustrated sigh. "I don't feel great. I feel like I'm drowning. Everyone expects me to be this perfect student, this perfect, everything. But I can't keep up. I'm not good enough." His mother's eyes softened with understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Jamal. You just have to do your best. And I know you're doing your best. It's not about what they expect. It's about what you expect from yourself." Jamal shook his head. "But what if my best isn't enough?" She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your best is always enough, Jamal. You are enough. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The weight of her words settled in, and for the first time in a long while, Jamal allowed himself to relax. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect. Maybe he just needed to be himself, flawed, yes, but determined. He took a deep breath, pushing the doubt aside. "I'm not done yet." It wasn't about what Marcus or anyone else thought. It was about Jamal and the road ahead. And no matter how hard it got, he wasn't going to stop. The weeks passed in a blur. Jamal felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between his desire to succeed and the crushing weight of self-doubt that threatened to pull him under. His grades were steady, but they weren't spectacular. The work was challenging, but he had never been one to shy away from hard work. Still, there was always that nagging feeling in the back of his mind, the one that whispered he wasn't really meant to be there, that he was an imposter in a world that wasn't made for people like him. Every day, he showed up, did the work, and kept his head down. But the pressure was starting to feel like a ticking time bomb. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the catalyst finally arrived. The class was taking a test on integration, something Jamal had struggled with at first, but had slowly gotten the hang of. He could feel the tension in the air as the teacher, Mrs. Dawson, handed out the test papers. She always had that look on her face when she was about to present something difficult. The challenge was her trademark, and everyone in the class knew it. Jamal glanced down at his test, the equations jumping off the page. His heart rate quickened. The first few problems were manageable, but by the time he reached the third question, he could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. The problems were more complex than he had anticipated. He looked around the room. Some students were breezing through it, while others, like him, were visibly struggling. His fingers gripped the pencil tighter, trying to steady his breathing. "Focus," he told himself. "You've got this. You can figure this out." But the more he tried, the harder it became. His mind went blank. His thoughts scattered in 1,000 different directions. The numbers and symbols on the page started to blur together. He glanced up again. Mrs. Dawson was standing by the whiteboard, her back to the class, seemingly unaware of the silent panic that was slowly creeping into Jamal's chest. The minutes ticked by slowly. The test was supposed to take an hour, but Jamal had only completed half of it. The pressure felt suffocating. He glanced at the clock again. Only 15 minutes left. His hands began to shake, and his breathing became shallow. He tried to calm himself, but it was no use. He had to finish, he had to prove himself, but the harder he tried, the more lost he became. And then it happened. As his mind spiraled into chaos, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Jamal turned, startled, and saw Marcus leaning in, his face a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Need some help, genius?" Marcus whispered, his voice thick with sarcasm. Jamal's stomach churned. He knew what Marcus was trying to do. He was trying to rattle him, to break his concentration. But it was more than that. This was a test, not just of his academic ability, but of his mental and emotional resilience. Marcus's presence, his taunting, was a reminder of everything Jamal had been battling in his head for months. "Leave me alone," Jamal muttered, trying to refocus on the test in front of him. Marcus laughed quietly. "You're not gonna get far without a little help, you know. You can't keep pretending like you're not out of your depth here." Jamal's heart raced. He could feel the frustration and anger bubbling to the surface. He wanted to yell at Marcus, to tell him to get lost, but he knew that would only make it worse. So instead, he did what he had been doing for weeks. He kept his head down and focused on the test. But the words continued to echo in his mind, "You're out of your depth. You don't belong here." The bell rang, signaling the end of the test. Jamal handed in his paper, his face flushed with embarrassment. He knew he hadn't done well. He hadn't completed half of the test, and the problems he had attempted were filled with errors. It wasn't his best work, and that fact gnawed at him. As he walked out of the classroom, he felt a mixture of defeat and frustration. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus had been right. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe he was in over his head. But just as he was about to head toward his next class, a voice stopped him. "Jamal." He turned to see Raquel jogging toward him, a bright smile on her face. "Hey," she said, a little out of breath. "How was the test?" Jamal shrugged, trying to keep his expression neutral. "It was hard. I don't think I did very well." Raquel raised an eyebrow. Don't sell yourself short. You've got this. Jamal smiled weakly. I'm not so sure. Raquel's expression softened. Look, I know it's tough. But don't let one test get to you. You're here for a reason, Jamal. You belong in that class. You've proven that already. Jamal wanted to believe her, but the doubt lingered. I don't know, Raquel. It just feels like I'm always trying to catch up. Like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough. Raquel put a hand on his shoulder. It's not about being perfect, Jamal. It's about progress. You've come a long way. One test isn't the end of the world. You're going to bounce back. Jamal looked into her eyes and saw the sincerity there, the belief she had in him. For a moment it was enough to push the doubt back. Thanks, he said quietly. I needed to hear that. Raquel smiled. Anytime. You're going to crush the next one. I believe in you. That evening, Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the test paper he had received back. The grade wasn't as bad as he had expected, but it wasn't great either. He had passed, but just barely. He had made a lot of mistakes, and that was something he couldn't ignore. But as he sat there, staring at the paper, he realized something. This wasn't the end. This wasn't the moment he had to prove everything. The mistakes he had made were just another step in the process, another lesson to learn. And he wasn't going to let one bad test define him. He took a deep breath and pushed the paper aside. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to face it. He had already proven that he could survive the hard times. And this was just another challenge to overcome. Jamal stood up, feeling the weight of the day lifting from his shoulders. The world was still full of doubts, full of people who didn't believe in him. But as long as he had his own belief, that was all that mattered. He was ready to keep fighting. The following weeks passed in a blur of tests, homework, and late-night study sessions. Jamal was no longer just the quiet kid in the back of the class, he had become a symbol of resilience, though that was something he only realized in hindsight. The more he showed up, the more he kept pushing through despite his doubts, the more people started noticing him. But it wasn't the attention from his classmates or the teachers that mattered the most, it was the small, quiet moments of connection, the ones that reminded Jamal he wasn't in this alone. It was a chilly Friday afternoon when Jamal found himself in the library, working on yet another assignment for his advanced math class. The library had become his sanctuary over the past few weeks, a place where he could escape the world and focus. The quiet hum of students studying, the soft rustle of pages turning, the sound of fingers tapping on keyboards, it all calmed him. It was the one place where his mind didn't feel like it was constantly being pulled in a million different directions. As he sat at a table near the back, going over his notes, he was startled by the sound of someone clearing their throat. He looked up to find Raquel standing in front of him, holding a stack of books in her arms. Hey, she said, a warm smile on her face. I thought I'd find you here. I need your help with something. Jamal blinked, surprised. My help? With what? Raquel sat down across from him, placing the books on the table. I'm struggling with a few of these problems, and I thought you might be able to explain them to me. You've been doing well in class lately, so I figured you might have cracked the code. Jamal chuckled softly, feeling a little self-conscious. I'm not sure I've cracked anything. I'm just trying to keep up. Raquel raised an eyebrow. Don't sell yourself short. You're the one who helped me with that last test, remember? Jamal nodded, but he could feel his usual insecurities creeping in. I don't know if I can explain it that well. I'm still figuring it out myself. But Raquel wasn't backing down. I know you can do it. You've got the talent, Jamal. Don't underestimate yourself. The encouragement hit Jamal harder than he expected. There was something about her belief in him that made him want to prove her right. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll give it a shot. What's the first problem? Raquel pulled a textbook from the stack and opened it to a page filled with equations. Jamal leaned over and started to explain the first problem, carefully breaking it down into smaller steps. He wasn't sure why, but as he spoke, the concept seemed to make more sense to him too. His words were more confident, his understanding clearer than it had been before. As he guided Raquel through the problem, he realized something: teaching someone else helped him solidify his own understanding. They worked together for nearly an hour, solving problem after problem. As the time passed, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment settle in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about finishing assignments or acing tests, it was about the process, about the small victories. Raquel was patient, kind, and most importantly, she was genuinely appreciative of his help. When they finally wrapped up, Jamal smiled. "I think we've got it." Raquel grinned. "Definitely. Thanks, Jamal. You really know your stuff." Jamal's chest swelled with a quiet pride. "No problem. I'm just glad I could help." As Raquel gathered her books, she paused. "You know, Jamal, you're not as alone in this as you think." Jamal looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Raquel sat back down. "I've been watching you. I've seen how hard you work, how much effort you put into everything, even when things get tough. But there's something you need to realize: there are people who see you. There are people who believe in you, even if they don't always show it." Jamal blinked, unsure of how to respond. He was used to being on the outside, to feeling like he was always fighting alone. But hearing this from Raquel was different. It made him feel less isolated, less like an imposter. "You've got more people on your side than you think," Raquel continued, her eyes locking onto his. "I'm one of them." Jamal felt something stir in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel the warmth of that simple truth: he wasn't alone. The following days felt a little easier, and Jamal found himself becoming more confident in his abilities. His study sessions with Raquel had opened his eyes to the fact that there were people who cared about him, who saw his struggles and were there to support him. And it wasn't just Raquel, he realized that there were others, too. His teachers, who had been skeptical of him at first, now recognized his potential and began offering small pieces of encouragement. Even his classmates, while still cautious, had started to view him differently. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments when the doubt crept back in, when Jamal wondered if he truly belonged in the advanced class. There were still moments when Marcus's words echoed in his mind, telling him he wasn't good enough, that he didn't belong. But Jamal was learning to drown out those voices. He was learning to focus on the people who believed in him, the ones who saw his worth and pushed him to be better. It was during one of the school's monthly assemblies that Jamal found himself in the most unexpected of places. The principal, Mr. Edwards, was standing at the podium, giving a speech about the importance of perseverance and determination. Jamal had heard the speech a dozen times before, but today, there was something different about it. Today, Mr. Edwards announced that the school would be holding an award ceremony to recognize outstanding achievements in various fields. Jamal had never been one to chase awards, but when Mr. Edwards called out his name for outstanding achievement in advanced mathematics, Jamal's heart skipped a beat. It felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't fully process. He stood up, a bit stiffly, and walked to the stage. As he stood there, accepting the award, he felt the weight of all the hard work, all the late nights and difficult moments, wash over him. It wasn't the award that mattered, it was the recognition. For the first time, Jamal realized that his hard work wasn't going unnoticed. He was being seen. He was being recognized for more than just his grades, he was being recognized for his determination, his resilience, and his ability to rise above the doubts that had threatened to hold him back. Later that evening, as Jamal sat on his bed, staring at the award in his hands, he felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges along the way. But for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt ready to face them. And as he glanced at the text from Raquel that had just come through, told you. Proud of you, Jamal. He realized that he didn't need to prove himself to anyone else. He had already proven everything he needed to prove to himself. Jamal woke up on Monday morning to the sound of his phone buzzing on the desk. He rubbed his eyes and groggily reached for it, the half-worn award sitting beside him. His hand paused as he stared at the text on the screen. Marcus, congrats, Jamal. You've earned it. But don't get too comfortable. There's more where that came from. Jamal frowned, his finger hovering over the reply button, but he didn't send anything. The message was a reminder of the tension that had been building between him and Marcus ever since their run-ins in class. The taunts, the challenges, the constant undermining, it had always been there, lurking in the background. But lately, it had started to feel different. There was something almost personal in Marcus's latest message. Jamal threw his phone back onto the desk and rubbed his temples. He had earned that award. He had worked hard for it, and he wasn't going to let Marcus's words ruin it. Still, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing, something he hadn't seen coming. By the time Jamal arrived at school, the usual hum of the hallway felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to hang in the air, thicker than usual. Jamal's classmates were whispering, giving him strange looks, their conversations quieting as he passed by. He didn't know what was going on, but the feeling of unease settled in his stomach. It wasn't until lunch that things started to unfold. As he sat down with Raquel at their usual table, she looked at him with a concerned expression. Have you heard? Heard what? Jamal asked, his brow furrowing. Raquel glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Marcus. He's been talking about you. Not just behind your back. Right to people's faces. He's spreading rumors. Jamal's heart sank. What kind of rumors? Raquel took a deep breath. He's telling people that you didn't earn that award. That you only got it because of, well, because of your race. Jamal's stomach churned. What? That's ridiculous. I worked for it. I know, Jamal. I know, Raquel interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. But that's what he's been telling everyone. And he's been making it sound like it's some big conspiracy. Like they handed it to you just to check a box or something. Jamal felt his blood pressure rise. He had expected criticism, sure. He had been prepared for the challenges, for the doubts. But this? This was different. This was something insidious, something that questioned not just his abilities but his very worth. Isn't that just? I don't know, unfair. Jamal muttered. I mean, why would people listen to that? Why are they taking him seriously? Raquel gave him a sympathetic look. I wish I knew. But it's Marcus, Jamal. He's got a lot of people fooled. And I'm afraid it's starting to have an effect on how people view you. Jamal's mind raced. The last thing he wanted was to be reduced to a stereotype or used as some sort of token. He had worked hard to get where he was, and now Marcus was twisting his achievements, using them to further his own narrative. It felt like a betrayal, and Jamal wasn't sure how to deal with it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jamal couldn't focus on his classes. Every time he glanced around, it seemed like people were talking in hushed tones, throwing him sideways glances. It was like his entire existence had been reduced to something he couldn't control. The weight of the rumors hung around him, suffocating him. When the final bell rang, Jamal practically bolted out of the school. He didn't want to face anyone. He didn't want to hear what more people had to say about him. He just needed to be alone. But as he walked down the hallway, he was stopped by none other than Marcus, standing in the middle of the exit, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. You can't run from this, Jamal, Marcus said, his voice low. The truth's out. People are talking. You think you're special because you got that award? You think it's because you're smart? No. It's because they needed a good story to sell. You were just the poster child. Jamal stood frozen, anger boiling inside him. You don't know anything about me. You have no idea what I've had to go through to get here. Marcus smirked, his eyes flashing with a mix of superiority and contempt. I know exactly what you are. A token. Nothing more. Jamal's pulse quickened. He could feel his fists clenching at his sides, his body tensing, the urge to yell at Marcus rising like a storm inside of him. But there was something else, something deeper, the urge to defend himself, to set the record straight. He had done nothing wrong. He didn't deserve to be painted as some charity case. Before Jamal could say anything, Marcus added, "You'll never be seen as one of them. You're just a black kid who got lucky. And people are going to start realizing that." The words hit Jamal like a slap in the face. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. The anger was there, but it was quickly overtaken by a sense of shame, doubt creeping back into his thoughts. Was Marcus right? Was everything he had worked for just a fluke? Was he really just a token? He stood there, speechless, staring at the ground. Marcus chuckled darkly and walked away, leaving Jamal standing there, his thoughts spinning. By the time Jamal got home that evening, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He tossed his backpack on the couch and sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. The echoes of Marcus's words still rang in his ears, drowning out everything else. For the first time in a long time, Jamal wasn't sure what to do. His mind felt like a storm, a chaotic whirl of anger, confusion, and sadness. He thought of Raquel, who had tried to support him, and of the teachers who had believed in him. But none of that seemed to matter now. What good was all that support if it could be torn down so easily? Jamal picked up his phone and, for the first time, he found himself staring at Marcus's message again. He hadn't replied to it before, but now it felt like it might be time to say something. To put Marcus in his place. To prove that Jamal was more than just a story, more than just a label. But as his fingers hovered over the keys, he realized something important. He didn't need to prove anything to Marcus. He didn't need to waste his energy on someone who couldn't see beyond their own ignorance. What mattered was the truth. What mattered was how he saw himself. Jamal put the phone down and stood up, walking to the window. He could hear the distant sounds of the city outside, a reminder that life kept moving, that the world wasn't going to stop just because of one person's cruelty. He had worked too hard to let Marcus, or anyone, define him. The next few days felt like they moved in slow motion for Jamal. Every step he took through the school hallways, every glance from a classmate, every whisper felt heavier than the last. It was as though the weight of Marcus's words had infected everything around him. Even his once comforting classroom had begun to feel hostile. The quiet sneers, the hushed conversations, each one left Jamal feeling like an outsider, even in his own school. But he wasn't going to let it break him. Not this time. On Friday, during lunch, Jamal found himself sitting alone at the back of the cafeteria. He used to be fine with being by himself, used to the solitude that came with being the quiet, introverted kid. But today, it felt different. Today, he felt like an outsider in his own skin. Raquel had been away that morning, sick, and Jamal had noticed a few people giving him sidelong glances as he sat down. Some smiled, others simply turned away. There were moments when it felt like the entire school had turned against him because of one person's lie. He had never felt so small. As he picked at his food, he heard a voice from across the room. "Hey, Jamal. Mind if I join you?" Jamal looked up, startled, and saw a girl from his history class, Sarah, approaching with a tray of food. She wasn't part of his usual group, and Jamal had always seen her as one of the more popular girls. He had never really spoken to her much, so he wasn't sure what to expect. But as she sat down across from him, she smiled warmly. "You look like you could use a little company." Jamal stared at her for a moment. Sure. I mean, I didn't expect anyone to. Sarah cut him off with a chuckle. Yeah, I know what it feels like. I overheard some of the stuff people have been saying about you. Marcus has been spreading all kinds of rumors. But honestly, it's all nonsense. You're the smartest guy in our math class, and everyone knows it. Jamal blinked, surprised. You really think so? Of course I do, she said, nodding seriously. I've seen you work, Jamal. I know how hard you've been pushing. Don't let one person's ignorance make you doubt your worth. Her words hit Jamal in a way he didn't expect. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding his breath, waiting for someone to tell him it wasn't all in his head, that the rumors, the lies, weren't true. For a moment, Jamal felt the weight on his chest lift. He looked at Sarah, a grateful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Thanks, Sarah. That really means a lot. No problem, she said, shrugging casually as she took a bite of her sandwich. We all know who the real genius is around here. Jamal chuckled, his heart feeling a little lighter. He couldn't quite explain it, but there was something about the way Sarah spoke that made him feel seen, truly seen, not as some stereotype or token, but as a person. It was refreshing. After that lunch, something in Jamal began to shift. He didn't know if it was the simple kindness from Sarah or the fact that, for the first time in days, someone had told him he was worth something, but he felt a small fire light inside him. He wasn't just going to sit there and let Marcus, or anyone, define him. He was going to show them all who he really was. That evening, as Jamal sat at his desk, working on another complicated math problem, he made a decision. He wasn't going to ignore the rumors. He wasn't going to let them fester and ruin everything he had worked for. Instead, he was going to use it. Use it to fuel him. He would take the high road, but he wouldn't be silent. He would rise above the hate. The next day, during the last period of the day, Jamal found himself called to the principal's office. Mr. Edwards, who had become one of the few teachers who truly supported Jamal, was sitting behind his desk with a calm expression. Jamal, thank you for coming, Mr. Edwards said as Jamal entered. Have a seat. Jamal sat down, a bit nervous. Is something wrong, sir? No, Mr. Edwards said, shaking his head. It's about the recent rumors. I know they've been spreading. And I just want you to know, I believe in you. And I'm sure that no one else in this school does either. Jamal's eyes widened, surprised by the directness of the conversation. You believe in me? Mr. Edwards smiled. I've been watching you, Jamal. I've seen how hard you've worked. It's not just about the grades or the awards. It's about your character. You've come so far, and I want you to know that I stand by you. Jamal felt a warmth spread through him. For a long time, he had felt like an outsider, like he had to constantly prove himself. But hearing those words from Mr. Edwards, someone in authority, made all the difference. It wasn't just the students, it was the teachers too. He wasn't as alone as he thought. I've also spoken to the school board, Mr. Edwards continued. And they're aware of what's been going on. They're handling it. But I wanted to tell you, Jamal, don't let anyone, especially Marcus, make you doubt yourself. You're more than enough. You've always been enough. Jamal nodded, feeling a knot in his throat. He didn't know how to respond, except to say, thank you, Mr. Edwards. I really needed to hear that. You're welcome, Mr. Edwards said kindly. And remember, we're all in this together. You've got people who care about you. The next Monday, Jamal stepped into school with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let Marcus's lies define him. He wasn't going to let rumors or whispered words make him shrink back. He had something worth fighting for, and he wasn't going to back down. The day was surprisingly quiet, no new rumors, no taunts, no whispers. Marcus was still around, still trying to stir trouble, but it was clear that Jamal wasn't going to be swayed by his words anymore. Jamal walked to his locker with his head held high, meeting people's gazes, his own confidence growing with each step. He knew what he had to do. He knew who he was. And this time, nothing was going to stop him. The next few weeks passed like a blur for Jamal. The weight of Marcus's rumors still lingered in the air, but there was a subtle shift in the way people treated him. It wasn't as if the whispers had disappeared entirely. But the force behind them seemed to have lessened. Perhaps it was because more people had begun to see Jamal for who he truly was, a hard-working, brilliant student who had earned every ounce of recognition he had received. Despite the remaining tension, Jamal's resolve had only strengthened. He spent hours studying, pushing himself to reach new heights in his academics, but also focusing on the other aspects of his life that had always been important, his friends, his family, and his dreams. And in the midst of it all, he realized something. The more he dedicated himself to his craft, the more he found peace within himself. Raquel had continued to support him, even when it felt like the weight of the world was crashing down. Her words, that simple reminder of his worth, had sparked something in him. She wasn't the only one who believed in him, others were beginning to come around, too. One afternoon, as Jamal walked into the library after school, he saw Sarah sitting at a table, her face buried in a book. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Hey, Jamal," she greeted, closing her book and patting the seat next to her. "How's it going?" "Good. Really good, actually," Jamal said, sitting down. He felt lighter than he had in a long time. "I've been working on a new project for the science fair. It's going to be pretty challenging, but I think I've got something that'll blow the judges away." "I'm sure you will," Sarah said, grinning. "You always do." Jamal's smile faltered for a moment. He wasn't so sure about that. He had a sense that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, especially with Marcus still lurking in the background, determined to undermine him at every turn. "But there's something I want to talk to you about," Sarah continued. "About Marcus." Jamal's expression hardened at the mention of his name. He had been trying to move past Marcus's constant presence, but it seemed like he couldn't escape it. "What about him?" Jamal asked. Sarah leaned in, her eyes intense. "He's planning something, Jamal. He's trying to use your success against you. He's spreading more rumors, and he's making it seem like you're only doing well because of some kind of special treatment. He's even talked to some of the teachers about it." Jamal's fists clenched. "What? I thought things were calming down." "They are," Sarah said quickly, "but Marcus isn't going to stop. He thrives on this. He wants to bring you down, and he's not going to let up until he does. But we can't let him." Jamal took a deep breath. "I'm not going to let him control me, Sarah. But it's getting exhausting. Every day feels like a battle." "I get it," she said, her voice softening. "But you can't fight this alone. We're all behind you. Me, Raquel, and anyone else who believes in you. We're not going to let Marcus win. We're going to expose him for what he really is." Jamal was silent for a long moment, processing Sarah's words. He had never been one to engage in public conflict, but now it felt like there was no choice. The rumors weren't going away. They were just getting louder, more aggressive. "What should I do?" Jamal asked. "You need to speak your truth," Sarah said firmly. "You need to let everyone know who you really are. Not just with words, but with your actions. Keep pushing. Keep showing them that you're more than what they say you are. And we'll stand by you, every step of the way." The next day, Jamal woke up with a new sense of determination. The weight of the rumors hadn't disappeared, but now, he felt ready to face them head-on. He had kept quiet for too long, letting Marcus's lies swirl around him, slowly chipping away at his confidence. No more. At school, he made it his mission to keep his head up, to stay focused on his work, and to let his achievements speak for themselves. In class, he continued to excel, solving problems with ease and demonstrating his knowledge to anyone who doubted him. But this time, it wasn't just about the grades. It was about proving to himself that he didn't need to fight fire with fire. He didn't need to stoop to Marcus's level. During lunch, Jamal stood in front of the cafeteria with his lunch tray, looking around at the sea of faces. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't just trying to survive the day. He was living it. He was standing tall in a place where people had tried to tear him down. As he made his way to a table, he noticed a few people giving him knowing glances. They had heard the rumors, but now they saw something different in Jamal. They saw a person who wasn't afraid to stand up for himself. And then, to his surprise, a few people waved him over. It was the group that used to hang out with Marcus, the ones who had once been part of his inner circle. Now, they were inviting him to sit with them. Jamal hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then he saw Raquel wave him over from a different table, smiling brightly. She had been there for him through thick and thin, and he trusted her. He gave a small nod to the group but walked toward Raquel instead. As he sat down with her, she grinned. "I think we're winning this, Jamal." He smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Yeah. I think we are." As the days went by, the situation began to shift in Jamal's favor. Marcus's efforts to undermine him started to fall apart. The more he tried to spread rumors, the more people saw through the lies. Even some of his former friends began to pull away from him. Jamal's resolve had been unwavering, and slowly but surely, the truth about him began to shine through. It wasn't just about proving his worth anymore. It was about reclaiming his narrative, about showing the world that no one, especially Marcus, could define who he was. And as he did, he noticed something even more powerful than that. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or treated as less than because of who they were. Jamal wasn't going to hide anymore. He was ready to take the world by storm. The weeks that followed Jamal's newfound resolve were a whirlwind. With every passing day, his sense of purpose grew. He continued to pour himself into his schoolwork, focusing on his science project, his math assignments, and everything that would show the world who he truly was. But it wasn't just about academic achievements anymore. It was about proving that he could be more than just a victim of rumors, more than just a stereotype. He was going to rise above it all. However, as Jamal felt stronger, so did Marcus's desperation. It was on a Wednesday morning that things began to spiral. The bell had just rung, signaling the start of homeroom. Jamal was sitting at his desk, trying to ignore the occasional stares from his classmates. Raquel sat next to him, her usual smile not as bright as it had been. Jamal could tell something was wrong. "What's up?" he asked quietly, nudging her elbow. Raquel glanced over her shoulder before leaning in closer. "I heard something this morning," she said in a hushed voice. "Marcus is planning to escalate things. He's not going to let this go. I think he's going to try to bring the school board into it." Jamal's stomach dropped. "The school board?" "Yeah. He's claiming that you've been getting special treatment from the teachers, that you're cheating your way through everything," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "He's even going to try to get your grades reviewed." Jamal stared at her, his mind racing. Special treatment? Cheating? The accusations felt like a slap in the face. He had worked harder than anyone to earn his place, he didn't deserve to have it questioned. But if Marcus was going to go this far, it could ruin everything. "I don't know what to do," Jamal said, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. "I've already done everything right. But if he's going to do this, what can I do?" Raquel looked determined. "We're going to handle it. You don't have to face this alone. We'll talk to the teachers, the principal, anyone who can help." That afternoon, Jamal found himself sitting in the principal's office with Mr. Edwards, Raquel beside him, trying to keep calm as Marcus's claims were laid out before them. Marcus had already gone to the school board with accusations that Jamal was benefiting from preferential treatment. He had even gone so far as to suggest that Jamal had been allowed to redo tests or assignments without permission. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest as he listened to the words. He felt his world starting to crumble. He had never been the kind of student who asked for shortcuts, who relied on favors or easy ways out. Everything he had achieved, he had earned through sheer determination. But now, Marcus was twisting that, creating a narrative that painted Jamal as someone he wasn't. Mr. Edwards sat back, clearly frustrated by the accusations. "I've reviewed all of Jamal's records, Marcus," he said, his voice calm but firm. "There's no basis for these claims. He's earned every grade, every recognition. If there was any doubt, we would have investigated by now. But we've seen no indication of any misconduct." Marcus's face twisted into a sneer. "You just don't want to see the truth," he spat. "You're all just covering up for him because of some misplaced sense of guilt. It's the truth, and everyone knows it. Jamal isn't what he seems." Jamal's hands clenched into fists, but he stayed silent. He knew that getting angry would only fuel Marcus's fire. He had to be the bigger person, even if it felt impossible. Raquel shot Marcus a glare, her voice cold and biting. "That's enough, Marcus. You've made your accusations, but they're baseless. You're just mad because you can't handle someone else succeeding without tearing them down." Marcus stood up, his face reddening with anger. "I'll make sure you regret this, Jamal," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "Just wait and see." As Marcus stormed out of the room, Jamal let out a long, shaky breath. His mind was reeling. It was one thing for someone to spread rumors, he could handle that. But this? This was an attack on his character, on everything he had worked for. He felt like his entire world was slipping through his fingers, despite everything he had done to keep it together. Mr. Edwards looked at Jamal, his face a mixture of concern and resolve. "I'm going to handle this. Don't worry. These accusations won't stand. You've been nothing but exemplary, Jamal. And I'll make sure the school board knows that." Raquel placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression determined. "We're not going to let him get away with this." Jamal nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the people who had stood by him. But he knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He was going to have to fight harder than ever before, not just for his grades, but for his integrity, his honor. He wasn't going to let Marcus destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. The next few days were a blur of meetings with the school board, with teachers, and with the principal. Jamal had to defend himself more times than he could count, explaining the same story over and over again. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't cheated. He had earned every ounce of recognition through hard work. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the school board issued a statement. The accusations were unfounded. Jamal was cleared of any wrongdoing. But even as the official statement came through, Jamal knew it wasn't over. Marcus wasn't the kind of person to let things go that easily. He'd be back, Jamal was sure of it. And when he came back, Jamal would be ready. But for now, for the first time in weeks, Jamal allowed himself to breathe. The weight of Marcus's lies had been lifted, and though the scars remained, Jamal knew he could overcome them. The next day, as Jamal walked into school, he noticed something different. It was subtle, but the energy in the hallways had shifted. People who had once looked at him with suspicion were now giving him nods of acknowledgement. He didn't need to say anything, his actions had spoken for him. Jamal wasn't the boy they had tried to frame. He was the boy who had fought back. And he had won. The week following the school board's decision was a blur of relief and renewed strength for Jamal. The rumors, the accusations, and the pressure that had weighed on him for so long had finally started to fade, like the last remnants of a storm clearing from the sky. It wasn't just the victory over Marcus that gave him peace, it was the realization that he had remained true to himself, even when the world around him tried to pull him into a lie. Jamal stood at the school gates one Friday afternoon, staring at the small group of students gathered outside. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, his mind wasn't occupied with the academic pressures that used to consume him. Today, he was free. Raquel was beside him, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and she turned to Jamal with a grin. "You did it," she said, her voice light but filled with pride. "You held on. You fought back." Jamal smiled back, feeling the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting. "Yeah. I did." He wasn't sure when it had all started to feel real, that he could actually overcome everything that had been thrown at him. It had started with one small step, standing up for himself, even when it seemed like no one would listen. And now, here he was, surrounded by people who respected him, who had seen the truth for themselves. "Are you going to the science fair?" Raquel asked, interrupting his thoughts. Jamal nodded, a grin tugging at his lips. "Of course. I've been working on it for months." "You're coming, right?" Raquel rolled her eyes, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The day of the science fair arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. Students milled about, their projects set up on tables in the gymnasium, and the hum of conversation filled the space. Jamal moved through the crowd, the familiar feeling of nerves creeping in as he set up his own display. His project, a new method for renewable energy that combined solar power and wind energy, was ambitious, but Jamal was confident. This wasn't about winning, it was about proving his worth. His table was carefully arranged, with graphs, models, and a demonstration of how the technology worked. As he finished setting up, Raquel approached, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've been hearing people talk," she said, her voice low. "There's a lot of buzz about your project. People are actually impressed." Jamal smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I hope they like it. I've worked hard, so." "You've worked harder than anyone," she said, her tone unwavering. "And you've earned this." Just then, the judges began making their rounds. Jamal held his breath as they approached his table, eyeing the demonstration. He was ready, he had practiced his presentation over and over again, but this was the moment that truly mattered. The head judge, a woman in her 40s with short, gray hair and an air of authority, paused in front of Jamal's display. She studied the project, looking at the data, the models, and the charts. Then she turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "This is impressive," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of surprise. "Where did you come up with this concept?" Jamal took a breath, smiling slightly. "I've always been interested in renewable energy. I wanted to find a way to combine two of the most common forms, solar and wind, into something more efficient. I think this method could be a step toward more sustainable energy solutions." The judge nodded thoughtfully, scribbling something on her clipboard. "It's ambitious. And it's clear you've done your research. This could have some real-world applications." Jamal felt a thrill run through him. He had done it. He had put together something that mattered. As the judging continued, Jamal felt his confidence grow. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The accusations, the rumors, the struggles, all of it had brought him here, to this moment where his brilliance was finally recognized for what it was. Later that day, as the science fair came to a close and the judges began deliberating, Jamal stood with Raquel, anxiously awaiting the results. The gymnasium had emptied out, but the sense of anticipation lingered in the air. "I think you've got this," Raquel said, her voice full of conviction. "You've worked harder than anyone else in this school. You deserve it." Jamal looked around at the quiet, empty room. Despite the chaos and the drama of the past few weeks, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had done his best, and that was all that mattered. As the principal, Mr. Edwards, walked up to the microphone, the room fell silent. "We've seen some truly incredible projects today," he began, his voice carrying across the room. But one project, in particular, stood out for its creativity, its thoroughness, and its potential to impact the future. And the winner of this year's science fair is... Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear what came next, but at the same time, he knew that no matter the outcome, he had already won. His work had been acknowledged, his determination had paid off, and most importantly, he had proven to himself that nothing could define him except his own actions. "The winner is Jamal Harrison," Mr. Edwards announced. The room erupted in applause, and Jamal felt himself frozen in place for a moment. His name had never felt so real, so powerful. He could hear Raquel cheering beside him, but everything else faded into the background. This wasn't just about a trophy or recognition, it was about reclaiming his narrative, about standing tall in the face of adversity, and proving that the genius they had tried to suppress could never be hidden. As he walked up to accept his award, Jamal felt a sense of closure wash over him. This was his victory. It was a victory not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. As he stood there, holding the trophy in his hands, Jamal knew that this was just the beginning. There were still battles to fight, challenges to face, but now, he was ready. And nothing, not even the people who tried to bring him down, could take that away from him. The months following Jamal's victory at the science fair were a whirlwind of newfound respect, opportunities, and personal growth. It wasn't just about the recognition anymore, it was about the future. He was no longer the boy everyone tried to define by a single accusation or a single failure. Jamal Harrison had become someone more, someone who was no longer afraid to challenge the world, and himself. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Jamal woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. He reached over, his fingers still slightly numb from sleep, and checked the notification. It was from Raquel. "Urgent," the text read. "We need to talk. Something big has come up." Jamal furrowed his brow and quickly texted back. "What's going on?" Seconds later, Raquel replied. "Meet me at the park in an hour. I'll explain when you get here." Jamal rubbed his eyes. This didn't feel like just another casual hangout, it felt like something serious. He quickly dressed and headed out the door, his mind racing as he made his way to the park. When he arrived, Raquel was waiting by the fountain, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked anxious, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. Jamal approached her slowly, his curiosity piqued. "What's happening?" he asked as he took a seat beside her. Raquel took a deep breath before answering, her voice low. "I've been hearing some things. It's about Marcus." Jamal's stomach dropped at the mention of Marcus's name. It had been weeks since the science fair, and while things had quieted down, he knew that Marcus wasn't someone who would just let things go. "What about him?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his tone steady. Raquel looked around nervously, then leaned in closer. "I overheard a conversation. Marcus has been talking to a few of the school board members again. This time, he's not just making accusations about you cheating. He's claiming that you're manipulating your way into scholarships and special opportunities, that you're somehow taking advantages of people to get ahead." Jamal felt his chest tighten. "That's absurd. I've worked hard for everything I've earned. Why would anyone believe that?" Raquel's face softened with sympathy. "I don't know. But it sounds like Marcus has been spreading this rumor to some important people, people who can influence your future. Jamal, I'm worried this could affect your college applications." Jamal ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what Raquel had just told him. The thought of everything he'd fought for being threatened again was almost too much to bear. This wasn't just a high school rivalry anymore, it was his future at stake. That afternoon, Jamal sat at his desk, the weight of Raquel's words sitting heavily on his shoulders. The window was open, and the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over his room, but inside, he felt cold. This was it. This was the moment that would define whether he would be allowed to move on with his life or whether the shadow of Marcus's lies would continue to haunt him. He couldn't let that happen. Not now, not after everything. Jamal grabbed his phone and called his mother. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom. I need to talk," Jamal said, his voice tight with emotion. "It's about Marcus. He's trying to destroy everything again." His mother's voice instantly softened with concern. "What is it now, Jamal?" "They're claiming I'm manipulating my way into scholarships. That I'm cheating the system." "Don't worry about it," she said firmly. "We've been through worse than this. We know who you are. And if anyone dares to doubt that, we'll handle it." Jamal sighed, feeling both comforted and more determined. His mom always knew how to bring clarity when his thoughts were clouded. "Thanks, Mom. I'm going to fix this. I won't let them take this from me." The next day, Jamal walked into the school with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't afford to wait around any longer. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let a few petty lies tear down everything he'd accomplished. As he made his way to the principal's office, he saw a familiar face. It was Mr. Edwards, and he was speaking to someone Jamal didn't recognize. The man was in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase, and the look on his face made Jamal uneasy. "Mr. Harrison," Mr. Edwards said, spotting him. "I'm glad you're here. This is Mr. Thompson from the College Scholarship Committee." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The Scholarship Committee? What was this about? Mr. Thompson gave him a sharp, assessing look. "Jamal, I've heard some concerning things. There have been accusations that you've been using dishonest means to secure scholarships and opportunities. I wanted to give you a chance to address these concerns directly." Jamal could feel his palms starting to sweat, but he held his ground. "That's a lie. I've earned every opportunity through hard work. I've never taken advantage of anyone or manipulated the system. If someone is telling you otherwise, they're spreading false information." Mr. Thompson didn't immediately respond, but Jamal could see that his words were being considered. This was his moment, his chance to make the truth clear. "I have all the proof to back up my claims," Jamal continued. "All of my scholarship applications are documented, my grades are above reproach, and my achievements are all legitimate. If you want to check my records, you'll see that everything I've done has been by the book." Mr. Thompson studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I appreciate your honesty, Jamal. We'll be looking into this further, but I have to say, your reputation precedes you. If what you're saying is true, we'll make sure to address the situation properly." Jamal stood tall, not willing to back down. "Thank you." Later that afternoon, Jamal received a call from Raquel. She was bubbling with excitement. "You did it," she exclaimed. "Mr. Thompson called me. He said they're going to investigate Marcus's claims, and if they find out it's all lies, they'll make sure Marcus is held accountable." "Jamal, you're going to be fine." Jamal let out a relieved breath. This was it, his reputation was about to be cleared once and for all. "Thanks, Raquel," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." As Jamal lay in bed that night, staring out the window at the moonlit sky, he realized how far he'd come. He had been through so much, and yet, here he was, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The world had tried to knock him down, but Jamal Harrison wasn't going anywhere. He was just getting started. The days that followed were tense, but Jamal could feel something in the air shifting. The storm that had hovered over him for so long seemed to be dissipating, and with each passing day, the weight that had once been crushing him lightened, piece by piece. He knew that the Scholarship Committee's investigation into Marcus's claims was only the beginning. If they truly understood the truth, Jamal would have a chance at something bigger, something that had always seemed just out of reach. It was a Thursday afternoon when the final decision came. Jamal was sitting in his favorite corner of the school library, Raquel beside him, studying for an upcoming physics exam. His mind wasn't on the formulas and equations in front of him, it kept drifting back to the conversation he'd had with Mr. Thompson just a few days ago. He had laid out all the evidence, his application records, his grades, his achievements. He had stood his ground. And now, he would finally know whether the truth would come to light. Raquel nudged him gently, bringing him back to the present. Hey, Jamal. You've got this. I know it's been tough, but you've done everything you can. Just breathe. Jamal smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering support. I just want it to be over, he muttered. I'm tired of always feeling like I have to prove myself. I get it, Raquel said. But you don't have to prove anything anymore. Everyone who matters knows exactly who you are. Before Jamal could respond, his phone buzzed on the table, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Mr. Edwards. Jamal, please meet me in my office immediately. We need to discuss something important regarding your scholarship. Jamal didn't waste a second. He stood up, grabbing his bag, and gave Raquel a quick nod. I'll call you after. When Jamal stepped into Mr. Edwards's office, he was greeted by both the principal and Mr. Thompson, the scholarship committee member. Jamal's palms were sweaty, but he held his head high, keeping his posture straight. Mr. Edwards gave him a solemn look. Jamal, I appreciate your patience during this process. Mr. Thompson has reviewed all the evidence, and we've had multiple discussions about the claims made against you. Jamal's heart was pounding in his chest. And, he asked, his voice steady but tight with anticipation. Mr. Thompson spoke up. Jamal, after a thorough investigation, we can confirm that the allegations made by Marcus were entirely false. There is no evidence of manipulation or dishonesty on your part. Your academic record, your achievements, and your character all stand on their own merit. Jamal felt a flood of relief wash over him. The weight that had been pressing down on his shoulders for so long lifted in that single moment. The truth had prevailed. We've also informed Marcus of the situation, Mr. Edwards continued. His actions were not only damaging to you, but they also reflected poorly on the integrity of this school. As a result, we've decided to take appropriate disciplinary action. This is not how we expect students to represent themselves, and we will not tolerate it. Jamal's lips twitched into a small smile. He hadn't anticipated this, but it was just. After everything he'd endured, it felt right. The person who had tried to tear him down, to paint him as someone he wasn't, was finally facing consequences for his actions. Thank you, Jamal said, his voice filled with gratitude. For listening. For believing me. Mr. Thompson extended a hand, and Jamal shook it firmly. It was the least we could do. You've shown incredible strength throughout this ordeal, and your future looks bright. Keep moving forward, Jamal. Jamal nodded, his mind still reeling with the news. This wasn't just about vindication, it was about growth. He had proven to himself that no matter how hard life got, he would never let anyone define his worth. Later that evening, Jamal sat with his mom at the dinner table, the smell of her famous fried chicken filling the room. She was talking animatedly about her day at work, but Jamal was lost in his thoughts. His phone buzzed once again, and he picked it up to see a text from Raquel. You did it. They cleared your name. I knew you could do it. Let's celebrate this weekend. Jamal smiled as he typed back. Thanks, Raquel. I couldn't have done it without you. We'll definitely celebrate. His mom caught sight of him grinning and raised an eyebrow. What's got you so happy? Jamal looked at her, his heart full. It's over, Mom. They cleared my name. I'm finally free. His mom's face softened, and she placed her hand on his. I knew it, Jamal. I knew you'd come through. And now, you can start living your life without looking over your shoulder. The world's your oyster. Jamal leaned back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Everything he had fought for, his reputation, his future, his peace of mind, had been restored. He could breathe again. He could dream again. The weeks that followed were a blur of excitement and opportunities. Jamal was accepted to the college of his dreams, an offer that came with a generous scholarship. He had finally made it, his hard work and determination had paid off in ways he never imagined. At the college acceptance ceremony, Jamal stood on stage, holding his acceptance letter, his heart swelling with pride. The audience cheered, but in that moment, it felt as if the applause was for everything he had been through to get here. The late nights of studying, the accusations, the doubts, the trials, they had all led to this. And now, he was standing at the threshold of a new chapter. Raquel was in the front row, her face lighting up with joy. As Jamal locked eyes with her, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had been his constant through it all. Without her support, without her belief in him, none of this would have been possible. The final chapter of his high school story had been written, and it was a story of perseverance, redemption, and the power of truth. But Jamal knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. As he left the stage and made his way out into the world, he felt ready for whatever came next. There were still challenges to face, battles to fight, but Jamal Harrison had learned one crucial lesson: no matter what, he would never stop fighting for what was right. The future was his, and he would make the most of it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?